Is this a moment that's remembered? It has clearly a legacy for the structure of our politics, but is it remembered or is it forgotten, and why?
Well, it's more forgotten than remembered, I think. And Gloria Steinem said it herself. It's the most important event in American politics that nobody knows about. I'm not getting the quote 100% perfect. So I'm glad Gloria is not on the call to hear me. But yeah, it's been forgotten, and it's been forgotten for multiple reasons, I think. One reason is there was not the great hoped for rush of legislative accomplishment following the conference. Conference organizers hoped that the NWC would push the Equal Rights Amendment over the top in terms of ratification. But as we know, the Equal Rights Amendment was not ratified. So there is one potential failure in quotation marks, and other aspects of the NWC vision remain in dispute. If we can just go back to the sexual orientation plank just for a moment. In Texas, we're going to have a judge ruling tomorrow as to whether or not parents who take medical care of their transgender children are in violation of some law that has yet to be constructed in Austin. So that's one issue from the now that links directly back to the then. I think that the organizers of the conference would not be happy to see all of the undone work from the 26th plank. That said, there has been some progress in other areas. For example, addressing domestic violence is an area where there has been progress at the federal level. So the legacy in terms of legislation is mixed. And I think those mixed results have a lot to do with the collective forgetting of the conference that happened among the wider American populace.
And it's interesting to me, and maybe you see this differently, the whole Equal Rights Amendment debate seems largely forgotten. My students, my undergrads, when I bring this up, many have never even heard of it.
I agree with you completely, Jeremy. I don't think there is a tremendous awareness of the ERA. In fact, in working on this project, we have a very large team of scholars working on this project, some historians and humanists who are very aware, but also some technologists who's, we couldn't do this without them. I mean, let's be real here. But we were talking about the nomenclature on a particular aspect of the site, identifying whether participants were pro or anti ERA. And this technologist was wondering, why we were concerned with statistics for pitchers. Earned run average as opposed to equal rights amendment.
Right,
So
right,
yeah,
right. That's what they think it is. Exactly right.
yeah, yeah. Oh, goody. We're going to talk about baseball today. Students will think, no, not really. So yeah, there is quite a bit that is unknown about the very recent past that I think we as historians take for granted.
Yeah, and just sort of following up on that, there's a great question from Elizabeth Fry asking about Phyllis Schlafly. And of course, there was a series recently, Miss America, on Phyllis Schlafly, played by Kate Blanchett, played, I think, brilliantly by Kate Blanchett.
Yes.
Yeah, how would you connect Phyllis Schlafly to the story and the other side of the issue, the mobilization of the right around these issues?
Yeah. Yeah. So I I debated whether or not to give equal time, but I was given the NWC National Women's Conference as what to focus on. So I decided that I would not give equal time, and but I would bring the pro family movement in at the end. I didn't give a lot of attention to Phyllis Schlafly because she has been wrongly credited as the person who came up with the idea for the counter conference at the Astrodome. It really was not Schlafly's idea. She was, in fact, opposed initially to the idea of having a counter conference. The weekend that the NWC happened in Houston was the weekend before Thanksgiving. And Schlafly and her cohort thought that conservative women would be way too busy the weekend before Thanksgiving, baking pumpkin pies and getting ready to host large family gatherings, and would not be willing to make the trek to Houston for a publicity event. But Lottie Beth Hobbs disagreed. Lottie Beth Hobbs out of Fort Worth was the founder of one of the many conservative women's groups, the 4Ws, Women Who Want to Be Women was the name of her group. And Hobbs believed that this could be done, and she used her connections with the business community to get funding. Hobbs and her allies, and ultimately Schlafly, who came to the event at the Astro Arena and gave a powerful speech, loved to talk about the fact that people were paid to go to the NWC, but people came as a volunteer effort to their gathering. It was a criticism of the federal funding for the NWC. So yeah, this became another moment in Schlafly's storied career as a conservative activist.
Beth Hook has a great set of questions here. Can you talk about how the three first ladies contributed to the NWC and their speeches? Or was it just a be there and support while being quiet kind of thing?
No, it was much more than be there and support quietly in white gloves moment. So both Betty Ford and Rosalind Carter were outspoken feminists in their own right. If you'll remember, when during Gerald Ford's brief presidency, Betty Ford was asked what would she do if her daughter Susan, if she found out her daughter Susan was having sex, and Betty Ford essentially remarked she wouldn't be the least bit surprised if she learned that. And I'm sure if you asked the parents of many a teenager and they were truly honest, they would answer in a similar fashion. They would not be surprised about that. But for a first lady to say something like that was a huge big deal, and something that we really haven't seen since, which is probably good, because presidential parents should shield their children from that sort of publicity, I think. But Betty Ford was very outspoken about women's rights, and so was Rosalind Carter. So it was no surprise that they were there. Lady Bird Johnson had initially said that she didn't really think feminism was for her. She thought it was more for her daughter's generation. But as she examined the movement more carefully, and I suppose as she was nudged along by her White House press secretary, Liz Carpenter, who very much saw feminism as an issue for that generation, Lady Bird Johnson was all in by the time she went to Houston in 1977. So the three first ladies were not simply symbols, they were actual and genuine supporters. And Rosalind was there as a stand-in for Carter, who was a bit bashful about coming to Houston.
Right. And he, of course, had a pretty stormy relationship, though, with people like Bella Abzug and others, right?
Right. So after the 1977 conference was over, Carter fires Abzug from her post in the Carter administration, which is tasked really with trying to implement the recommendations from the conference. And that caused a major walkout of other members of the committee that Abzug was heading, and just was overall a bad look for Carter at a moment when he really didn't need any more bad looks
Right.
toward the end of his presidency.
So, Nancy, why have there not been other big conferences like this, or have there been, and we just don't think of them the same way? Is Hillary Clinton's appearance in Beijing at the international conference the equivalent, or how should we think about what comes after?
So yeah, nothing like this has come after. Certainly there was the big conference in Beijing and Hillary Clinton was there and she did attract a tremendous amount of attention, but that was not a congressionally funded affair. We've not done anything like this again within the United States. And I don't see it happening anytime soon either in this 50-50 US Senate, et cetera. Our country is way too divided on cultural issues to ever agree for there to be a conference of any particular segment of the population to discuss cultural issues. This was very much of a moment of the 1970s, and I don't see it replicating in the current political climate.
Okay, and Elizabeth Fry asks the question in a more historical frame: how would we connect, or how would you connect NWC to prior conferences? Obviously, most famously Seneca Falls,
Sure.
more than a century earlier, and what comes thereafter.
Yeah. So the NWC is unique because of its federal funding. That makes it a wholly different thing, I think, and it's unique also because of the effort to try to ensure all manner of diversity in terms of participation, racial diversity, income diversity, age diversity. There were checkoff forms that were almost the same from state to state to state that prospective delegates had to fill out, and they had to give their name and their address, and they had to give their occupation if they had one, and what organizations were they involved with. And at the bottom of the form, they had to check off their age range. And so there's an age range that captures those who are youngish and those who are middle age and those who are older, because the conference organizers wanted that range, and they had to indicate their religious identity, and they had to acknowledge their racial and ethnic identity. And so this was, I think, unique in terms of the populating of the conference, but in terms of a group coming together with mostly a like-minded vision. There were certainly conservatives elected as delegates to this conference, so we can't say that everybody who came to Houston was a feminist. And maybe that makes the conference different as well from something like Seneca Falls. Not everybody who came to Seneca Falls necessarily agreed with every proposal that was being put forward. Some of the Seneca Falls participants, as you all well know, were very concerned about the demand for voting rights as being too radical and too far of a move from where American society sat in the 1840s. But there's a voluntariness to all other such conferences that is just comes across a little bit differently in the NWC. So in terms of purpose, yeah, you can draw parallels, but in terms of populating the conference, its process makes it stand out.
Another great question from Robert Garcia. What advice would you have in teaching the impact this meeting had in society to students? And I think, Robert, correct me, yours are high school students. I don't remember if yours are high school or middle school, but yeah, what advice would you have in teaching this, Nancy?
Yeah, so depending upon your level of students, high school or middle school, that will probably depend.
Robert says high school, by the way. He just
School, yeah.
clarified.
I see that. So you can pick a plank that won't get you in too much trouble with the principal or the school board or the parents. And I realize that that's a thing in and of itself these days, but you could pick a plank and work with the students to look at what progress has or has not been made on, say, child care or child abuse, or what they called or domestic violence, or any other plank that you would wish to trace out. And that could become, that could become a medium or even longer term project that you have students working on for a week or several weeks to understand, why was this a concern in 1977? How has the concern changed over time? Or you could look at credit. There are a lot of different planks that that might not draw the ire of parents and administrators who are concerned about state funding. You could also, sorry, Jeremy, you could also look at the careers, the political careers that emerged out of the conference. And Texas is a really great place to do that. If you're coming to us from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, then Eddie Bernice Johnson, who is retiring from Congress at the end of the current session, was an NWC participant. If you are from the Houston area, then you've got Sylvia Garcia, who is a relatively newly elected member of Congress, who you could draw focus to. And from anywhere in Texas, you could go to Ann Richards
Right.
for work, because Ann Richards was an up and coming politician at the time of the conference. She was Travis County Commissioner at that point in time, and was tapped by Bella Abzug to take a leading role in the conference. And so you could use biography in that way to show how the conference propelled political careers forward. And there's a longer list of Texas women who had political careers more at the state and local level, who would only make sense depending upon where you are teaching, right? And names would not be known to your students, but probably should be known for what some of them did. So I'm thinking of Irma Rangel as one, and Ernestine Glossbrenner as another. There are a goodly number of folks who served in the Texas state legislature or in local offices who would be worth digging into. It might also be fun to dig into some of the women who had high profile careers in the private sector, and look at what they did. If you have access to newspapers.com, you can find a tremendous amount about the more activist people through that source.